Alrighty, we're going to be finishing up the last of chapter 4 and reading all of chapter 5. And there's a nice picture here that I'm about to show you of Sam interacting with the cygnets and the cob. What a sight, Sam said to himself. What a terrific sight. 7 trumpeters all in line, 5 of them just out of the egg. This is my lucky day. He hardly noticed how stiff he had become from sitting so long on the log. Like all fathers, the cob wanted to show off his children to somebody. So he led the cygnets to where Sam was. They all stepped out of the water and stood in front of the boy. All but the mother swan. She stayed behind. "Go-ho," said the cob. "Hello," said Sam, who hadn't expected anything like this and hardly dared breathe. The first cygnet looked at Sam and said, "Beep." The second cygnet looked at Sam and said, "Beep." The third cygnet greeted Sam the same way. So did the fourth. The fifth cygnet was different. He opened his mouth, but didn't say a thing. He made an effort to say beep, but no sound came. So instead, he stuck his little neck out, took hold of one of Sam's shoelaces, and gave it a pull. He tugged at the lace for a moment. It came untied. Then he let it go. It was a greeting. Sam grinned. The cob now looked worried. He ran his long white neck between the cygnets and the boy and guided the babies back to the water and to their mother. "Follow me," said the cob, and he led them off, full of grace and bursting with pride. When the mother thought her young ones had had enough swimming and might be chilly, she stepped out onto a sandy shore and squatted down and called them. They quickly followed her out of the pond and burrowed down under her feathers to get warm. In a moment there wasn't a cygnet in sight. Here is the picture of Sam being greeted by the cob and the cygnets, and there's one of the cygnets untying his shoe. At noon, Sam got up and walked back to camp, his mind full of what he had seen. The next day, he and his father heard Shorty's motor in the sky and saw the plane approaching. They grabbed their duffel bags. "Goodbye, camp. See you in the fall," said Mr. Beaver as he shut the door and gave it a pat. He and Sam climbed into the plane and were soon aloft on their way to Montana. Mr. Beaver did not know that his son had seen a trumpeter swan bring off her young ones. Sam kept the matter to himself. "If I live to be 100 years old," thought Sam, "I'll never forget what it feels like to have my shoelace pulled by a baby swan." Sam and his father were late arriving home at the ranch, but late as it was, Sam got out his diary before he turned in for the night. He wrote, "There are 5 cygnets. They are sort of a dirty brownish gray color, but very cute. Their legs are yellow like mustard. The old cob led them right up to me. I wasn't expecting this, but I kept very still. 4 of the babies said beep. The 5th one tried to, but he couldn't. He took hold of my shoelace as though it were a worm and gave it a tug and untied it. I wonder what I'm going to be when I grow up." He switched off the light, pulled the sheet up over his head, and fell asleep wondering what he was going to be when he grew up. Alrighty, here we go. Chapter 5, Louis. One evening, a few weeks later, when the cygnets were asleep, the swan said to the cob, "Have you noticed anything different about one of our children? The one we call Louis." "Different," replied the cob. "In what way is Louis different from his brothers and sisters? Louis looks all right to me. He is growing well. He swims, dives beautifully. He eats well. He will soon have his flight feathers." "Oh, he looks all right," said the swan, "and heaven knows he eats enough. He's healthy and bright and a great swimmer. But have you ever heard Louis make any sound as the others do? Have you ever heard him use his voice or say anything? Have you ever heard him utter a single beep or a single burble?" "Come to think of it, I never have," replied the cob, who was beginning to look worried. "Have you ever heard Louis say good night to us, as the others do? Have you ever heard him say morning, as the others do in the charming little way, burbling and beeping?" "Now that you mention it, I never have," said the cob. "Goodness, what are you getting at? Do you wish me to believe that I have a son who is defective in any way? Such a revelation would distress me greatly. I want everything to go smoothly in my family life so that I can glide gracefully and serenely, now in the prime of my life, without being haunted by worry or disappointment. Fatherhood is quite a burden at best. I do not want the added strain of having a defective child, a child that has something the matter with him." "Well," said the wife, "I've been watching Louis lately. It is my opinion the little fellow can't talk. I've never heard him make one word. I think he came into the world lacking a voice. If he had a voice, he'd use it, same as the others do." "Why, this is terrible," said the cob. "This is distressing beyond words. This is a very serious matter. His wife looked at him in amusement. "It's not too serious now," she said, "but it will be serious 2 or 3 years from now when Louis falls in love, as he surely will do. A young male swan will be greatly handicapped in finding a mate if he is unable to say coho, coho, or he can't mutter the usual endearments to a young female of his choice." "Are you sure?" asked the cob. "Certainly I'm sure," she replied. "I can remember perfectly well the springtime years ago when you fell in love with me and became chasing after me. What a sight you were, and what a lot of noise you made! It was in Montana, remember?" "Of course I remember," said the cob. "Well, the thing that attracted me the most to you was your voice, your wonderful voice." "It was?" said the cob. "Yes, you had the finest, most powerful, most resonant voice of any of the young male swans in Red Rock Lakes National Wildlife Refuge in Montana." "I did?" said the cob. "Yes, indeed. Every time I heard you say something in that deep voice of yours, I was ready to go anywhere with you." "You were?" said the cob. He was obviously delighted with his wife's praise. It tickled his vanity and made him feel great. He had always fancied himself as having a fine voice, and now to hear it from his wife's own lips was a real thrill. In the pleasure of the moment, he forgot all about Louis and thought entirely of himself. And of course, he did remember that enchanted springtime on the lake in Montana when he had fallen in love. He remembered how pretty the swan had been, how young and innocent she seemed, how attractive, how desirable. Now, he realized fully that he would never have been able to woo her and win her if he had been unable to say anything. "We'll not worry about Louis for the time being," said the swan. "He's still very young. But we must watch him next winter when we are in Montana for the season. We must stay together as a family until we see how Louis makes out." She walked over to where sleeping cygnets were and settled down next to them. The night was chill. Carefully she lifted one wing and covered the cygnets with it. They stirred in their sleep and drew close to her. The cob stood quietly thinking about what his wife had just told him. He was a brave, noble bird, and already he was beginning to work out a plan for his little son Louis. "If it's really true that Louis has no voice," said the cob to himself, "then I shall provide him with a device of some sort to enable him to make a lot of noise. There must be some way out of this difficulty. After all, my son is a trumpeter swan. He should have a voice like a trumpet. But first I will test him to make sure that what his mother says is true." The cob was unable to sleep that night. He stood on one leg quietly, but sleep never came. Next morning, after everyone had enjoyed a good breakfast, he led Louis apart from the others. "Louis," he said, "I wish to speak to you alone. Let's just you and I take a swim by ourselves to the other end of the pond where we can talk privately without being interrupted." Louis was surprised by this, but he nodded his head and followed his father, swimming strongly in his wake. He did not understand why his father wanted to speak to him alone without his brothers and sisters. "Now," said the cob, when they reached the upper end of the pond, "here we are, gracefully floating, supremely buoyant, at some distance from the others, in perfect surroundings. A fine morning, with the pond quiet except for the song of the blackbirds, making the air sweet." "I wish my father would get to the point," thought Louis. "This is an ideal place for our conference," continued the cob. "There is something I feel I should discuss with you very candidly and openly, something that concerns your future. We need not range over the whole spectrum of bird life, but just confine our talk to one essential thing that is before us on this unusual occasion." "Oh, I wish my father would get to the point," thought Louis, who by this time was getting very nervous. "It has come to my attention, Louis," continued the cob, "that you rarely say anything. In fact, I can't recall ever hearing you utter a sound. I have never heard you speak or say ho or cry out, either in fear or in joy. That is most unusual for a young trumpeter. It is serious. Louis, let me hear you say your beep. Go ahead, say it. Say beep." Poor Louis, while his father watched, he took a deep breath, opened his mouth, and let the air out, hoping it would say beep. But there wasn't a sound. "Try again, Louis," said his father. "Perhaps you're not making enough of an effort." Louis tried again. It was no use. No sound came from his throat. He shook his head sadly. "Watch me," said the cob. He raised his neck to its full height and cried, "Coho!" so loud it was heard by every creature for miles around. Now let me hear you go beep, he commanded. Say beep, Louie. Loud and clear. Louie tried. He couldn't beep. Let me hear you burble. Go ahead and burble. Like this. Burble, burble, burble. Louie tried to burble. He couldn't do it. No sound came. Well, said the cop, I guess it's no use. I guess you are dumb. When he heard the word dumb, Louie felt like crying. The cop saw that he had hurt Louie's feelings. You misunderstand me, my son, he said in a comforting voice. You fail to understand my use of the word dumb, which has two meanings. If I called you a dumb cluck or a dumb bunny, that would mean that I had a poor opinion of your intelligence. Actually, I think you are perhaps the brightest, smartest, most intelligent of all my cygnets. Words sometimes have two meanings. The word dumb is such a word. A person who can't see is called blind. A person who can't hear is called deaf. A person who can't speak is called dumb. That simply means he can't say anything. Do you understand? Louis nodded his head. He felt better. And he was grateful to his father for explaining that the word had two meanings. He still felt awfully unhappy, though. Okay, we're going to pause right there on page 42. Your video response question is, what problems may Louis have when he grows up, not being able to make noise like his brothers and sisters? Alrighty. Have fun with it and PCs.